All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into something pretty fascinating. It's all about how TikTok is changing the music industry. And we're not just talking about, dance challenges and stuff like that. It's about the real impact, how this platform, how it shapes the way we discover and consume music. And get this, we're going beyond just like anecdotes and opinions. We're going to be looking at some hard data. Thanks to this report from TikTok and Luminate. Now, you might not be familiar with Luminate, but they're basically like the data detectives of the entertainment world. They track everything, all the data behind what we watch and what we listen to. And they teamed up with TikTok to analyze a whole year of data from July 2022 to June 2023. Which was a pretty crazy time for music, let me tell you. There were so many shifts and changes happening in the industry. So get ready to uncover how TikTok is influencing things like music discovery, streaming revenue, even things like concert attendance and merch sales. It's way bigger than you might think.
Yeah, that time frame is particularly interesting because it really captures this pivotal moment in the music landscape. Time where we saw major changes, a lot of emerging trends. So the data we're going to be looking at, it's not just historical, it's really a window into the forces that are shaping the music industry right now.
Right. It's like a snapshot of a turning point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with something I'm sure we've all experienced. You're scrolling through TikTok, right? And all of a sudden you hear this song. And it just grabs you. And you're like, wait a minute, what song is this? That feeling. Well, this report found that as a TikTok user, you are way more likely to discover new music on social media or short-form video platforms than the average person. And it's not just a small difference, it's a global phenomenon.
Globally, TikTok users are significantly more likely to discover new music through these platforms. But in the US, it's actually double the likelihood compared to other platforms. So you can really see how dominant TikTok has become in shaping people's musical tastes, especially, I think, for younger generations.
It's like TikTok has become this massive playlist that's constantly changing, curated by millions of users, constantly introducing people to new sounds, new artists. But here's what I find really interesting. The report also found that you're much more likely to share music that you discover on TikTok. It's not just about listening in isolation. It's about spreading the love, creating this ripple effect that you just don't get with traditional methods, like just listening to your own private Spotify playlist.
Absolutely. And that sharing aspect is key because it creates this powerful network effect, amplifying a song's reach far beyond what traditional marketing could achieve. And what's really interesting is that all this discovery and sharing, it translates into real value for the music industry, especially when it comes to streaming revenue.
Wait, so you're saying those viral TikTok trends where everyone's using a certain song, that actually leads to real money for the artist? I mean, I knew those trends were powerful, but I never really connected the dots to like the financial impact. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, there's actually a strong correlation between a song's engagement on TikTok and its performance on streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. The data shows that more buzz on TikTok often leads to more streams, which translates into more revenue for artists and, of course, for the industry as a whole.
Right, because if people are discovering and sharing music they love on TikTok, it makes sense that they'd want to listen to it again and again on their, favorite streaming services.
Exactly. And speaking of streaming, the report found another really interesting thing. TikTok users are much more likely to actually pay for music streaming subscriptions. Globally, we see this trend, but it's really pronounced in the US. Like 62% of TikTok users in the US pay for music streaming, compared to just 43% of the general population.
Wow, that's a huge difference. But it makes you think. If TikTok is where you're discovering all this new music you love, it makes sense that you'd be more willing to shell out some cash, to invest in a streaming service to keep the music flowing.
Exactly. It suggests that TikTok users might have a totally different relationship with music than previous generations. They're not just passive listeners. They're active participants in the music discovery process, and they're willing to put their money where their ears are.
Yeah, it's not just about fleeting trends and viral dances. It's actually changing how people value and consume music, like on a fundamental level.
Exactly. But what's even more compelling, I think, is that TikTok's impact goes way beyond the digital realm. It's having a significant effect on the real-world experience of music, like going to concerts, buying merchandise.
Wait, really? Does TikTok actually get people out to shows and buying merch? Because that's what really matters for a lot of artists, right? So tell me about that real-world impact.
Well, the numbers are pretty impressive. Globally, TikTok users spend significantly more on music-related purchases compared to the average music listener. And in the UK, they spend a whopping 49% more.
49% more? That's not just a little bump. That's a tidal wave of spending.
Right. And the US isn't far behind. 38% of U.S. TikTok users went to a live music event in the past year, compared to 33% of regular music listeners. And the same trend holds true for merch. 45% of U.S. TikTok users bought band merch, while only 35% of the general music audience did.
Wow, so it's not just hype. TikTok is actually driving real-world engagement and putting money in artists' pockets. I love that. But here's a question. Is this mostly benefiting, like, the big-name artists? Or are independent and up-and-coming acts getting a piece of the pie, too?
That's a great question. And the report actually offers some insights on that front. One of the most interesting findings is that across all the countries studied, TikTok's audience has a much stronger preference for international music than the average person. So this suggests a potential leveling of the playing field, where artists from all over the world have a chance to connect with a wider audience.
So it's not just about whatever's topping the Billboard charts. It's about discovering hidden gems from all over the world. That's exciting. Can you give us some specific examples of how this plays out in different countries?
Sure. For instance, in the UK, 77% of TikTok users said they want access to music from global artists, significantly more than your average UK music listener. This indicates, I think, a greater openness to exploring music beyond what's typically played on the radio or promoted by major labels.
Makes sense. It seems like TikTok is breaking down those traditional barriers, exposing people to a much wider range of musical experiences.
Now, it gets even more interesting when we look at the U.S. Nearly half of U.S. TikTok users, 46% to be exact, listen to music that's not in English. That's 27% more likely than the average music listener.
Whoa, those numbers are mind-blowing. It really seems like TikTok is creating this more globalized music landscape, where language is less of a barrier than it used to be. But are TikTok users in the U.S. actually engaged with this international music, or is it just like passive listening?
Well, that's where it gets really fascinating. The report shows that U.S. TikTok users who listen to non-English music are also 33% more likely to say that having access to global music is extremely important to them.
So it's not just about casual listening. It's about actively seeking out and valuing diverse musical experiences.
Exactly. TikTok seems to be fostering this deeper appreciation for global music, which could have a really profound impact on the industry as a whole.
This is incredible. Before I move on, did the report itself highlight any specific voices or quotes that really capture the significance of all this data?
Yeah, absolutely. Ol Obermann from TikTok put it perfectly when he said, TikTok is already famous for being the launch pad for creating viral hits
Yeah.
and breaking new artists. But we wanted to understand how TikTok and its users impact the music industry more broadly. Luminate's findings prove what we had long known, that TikTok is the driving force behind music discovery in the industry, and that TikTok users are active, engaged, and highly valuable drivers of music industry revenues.
He's not wrong. And speaking of Luminate, Nick Lenzafame, their VP and head of research, had this to say. Luminate was happy to collaborate with TikTok on this report, as it demonstrates the value of data and research in today's entertainment ecosystem. After analyzing the data, our team was able to help TikTok tell a data-driven, objective story, showcasing their impact as a source for music discovery, and demonstrating how TikTok users are uniquely valuable to the music industry. We are always committed to unlocking the most essential data for our client partners. And in this report, we were able to do that on a global scale, leveraging a number of comprehensive data sources. It's incredible that they were able to gather data on such a global scale. This report really does paint this compelling picture of TikTok's influence.
Absolutely. It's clear that TikTok is this powerhouse when it comes to music discovery.
Yeah.
And its users are shaping the future of the industry in really profound ways.
What stands out to me is that we're not just talking about anecdotal evidence anymore. We're talking about hard data. That backs up what many of us have been observing for a while now.
Yeah, that data is crucial for understanding the complexities of the music landscape and anticipating future trends.
We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's so much more to explore. We'll continue our deep dive into TikTok's music impact after a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some of those really impressive numbers that show how TikTok is affecting real-world music experiences. Like, going to concerts and buying merch. It's one thing to stream a song, but it's a whole other level to actually get out there and see a band live or rock their t-shirt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's that tangible connection, right? You discover an artist online and then it spills over into the real world. That's going to be huge for the music industry, not just the digital side of things.
For sure. And the data really backs that up. Globally, TikTok users are spending way more on music-related purchases compared to people who aren't on the platform.
Hold on, before we go too deep into those global stats, can we rewind a little bit? You mentioned something before the break about UK TikTokers spending like 49% more on music purchases than the average listener. That number really stuck with me. That's a massive difference.
You have a good memory.
Yeah.
That's right, 49% more in the UK. It's huge. It really shows how TikTok is turning those casual listeners into dedicated fans who are actually willing to, put their money where their ears are. And the U.S. isn't too far behind either. 38% of U.S. TikTok users went to a live music event last year, compared to 33% of regular listeners.
Okay, so the UK loves their global artists. The US is embracing music in other languages. It feels like TikTok is really breaking down the walls of what we consider mainstream music. But I'm curious, does this trend of spending more on music apply across different genres, or is it concentrated in certain areas? Like, are we seeing a surge in vinyl sales because of TikTok, or is it more about concert tickets and digital downloads?
That's a great question. And to be honest, this particular report doesn't really go into detail about the specific types of music purchases that are being made,
Hmm.
but it's a really interesting point.
Right. It'd be fascinating to see a follow-up report that breaks down those spending habits by genre format, maybe even artist type, like independent versus major label.
Exactly. That kind of data would give us an even deeper understanding of how TikTok is influencing not just what we listen to, but how we actually consume and support music financially.
Okay, but let's get back to this idea of TikTok users being more open to international music. The report shows it's happening globally, and it's especially pronounced in the US, where nearly half of TikTokers are listening to music that's not in English. What's really cool to me is that it's not just passive listening either. They're actively seeking out and valuing those diverse musical experiences.
Yeah, it suggests a shift in how younger generations in particular are engaging with music. They're not bound by language or geographical limitations in the same way that maybe previous generations were.
It's like TikTok is opening up this whole new world of sound, right? I remember back in the day, discovering new music was mostly limited to whatever was on the radio or what my friends were listening to. But now with TikTok, you've got this endless stream of music from all over the world at your fingertips.
And it's not just about access, it's about discovery. The algorithm seems to be doing a pretty good job of surfacing music that aligns with your individual tastes,
Yeah.
even if it's in a language you don't understand or from a culture you're not familiar with.
It's like having a personal DJ who knows your music tastes better than you do and is constantly introducing you to new artists and genres.
Speaking of algorithms, I'm curious, do you think artists and labels are starting to create music specifically with TikTok in mind? Knowing how powerful that algorithm can be in pushing a song to a massive audience? That's a question that's being debated a lot in the music industry right now. Some artists are definitely leaning into that TikTok sound, crafting songs with those catchy hooks and danceable beats that are practically designed to go viral. But there's also a risk of sacrificing artistic integrity for the sake of algorithmic success.
Right. It's a balancing act. You want to create music that's authentic to you as an artist, but you also want to tap into the power of the platform to reach a wider audience. Do you think this trend of tailoring music for TikTok will continue? Or will the algorithm evolve to favor a more diverse range of sounds?
It's tough to say for sure. I think we'll probably see a combination of both. The algorithm will likely become more sophisticated in its ability to identify and promote a wider variety of music.
Hmm.
While artists will continue to experiment with different approaches to crafting songs that resonate on the platform.
It's definitely an exciting time to be a music lover. But what about people who are less tech savvy, like some of the older generations? Do you think they'll eventually embrace TikTok as a music discovery tool? Or will it remain primarily a platform for younger audiences?
Hmm, that's a really interesting question. And it's hard to predict. I think there's definitely potential for TikTok to appeal to a wider demographic, especially as the platform keeps evolving and adding new features. But whether or not older generations will fully embrace it as a music discovery tool, that remains to be seen.
It might come down to how much they trust algorithms to curate their musical taste. Some people might just prefer those more traditional methods of music discovery, like the radio or word of mouth recommendations from friends.
You're right. It's about finding what works best for each individual. But I do think TikTok has the potential to bridge those generational gaps when it comes to music. I've seen so many examples of parents and grandparents discovering new artists and genres through their kids or grandkids who are active on TikTok.
That's awesome. It's like TikTok is creating these shared musical experiences that can bring families and generations closer together. But let's not forget about the artists themselves. How do you think TikTok is impacting their careers beyond just the financial aspects? Is it changing the way they create music, interact with fans, or even view their own success?
Well, it's definitely having a huge impact on how artists approach their careers. TikTok has become an essential tool for building a fan base, promoting new releases and connecting with fans on a more personal level. For a lot of artists, it's not enough to just create great music anymore. They have to be savvy marketers and content creators as well.
It's like TikTok is creating this new breed of artist, one who's not only talented musically, but also really skilled at engaging with their audience online and using social media to build their career.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how different artists are adapting to this new landscape. Some are embracing it wholeheartedly, while others are still trying to figure out how to navigate this new world where online presence is just as important as musical talent.
It's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly exciting to witness this evolution in the music industry.
I agree. We're living in a time of massive change, and TikTok is at the forefront of it all. But I think it's important to remember that while technology can be this powerful force, it's ultimately the artists and their music that really matter.
Well said. Before we move on, let's take a minute to recap the key takeaways from this report. What are the most important things for our listeners to remember about TikTok's impact on the music industry?
Okay, so first and foremost, TikTok is now a dominant force in music discovery, especially for those younger generations. The platform's unique algorithm, along with its focus on user-generated content, has created this incredibly powerful system for surfacing and promoting new music.
And it's not just hype and viral trends either. TikTok is actually bringing real, tangible value for the music industry. We've seen how it's boosting streaming revenue, concert attendance, and merch sales.
For sure.
Yeah.
And beyond the financial side, TikTok is also creating more globalized and diverse musical landscape. Users are much more open to discovering music from different cultures and languages, is breaking down those traditional barriers and expanding people's musical horizons.
It's amazing to think about the potential long-term impact of all of this, but I think it's also important to remember that this is an ongoing conversation, and the music industry is constantly changing. What might seem revolutionary today could be completely normal tomorrow.
You got it. The data from this report gives us this valuable snapshot of what's happening right now, but it's just the beginning of a much bigger story.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into TikTok's impact on music, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing to remember is this: TikTok is more than just a social media app. It's a full-blown cultural phenomenon that's changing the way we discover, consume, and experience music. And it's only going to become more influential in the years to come.
I love that. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep sharing the music you love, because ultimately it's the power of music that connects us all, no matter the language, culture, or generation.
Beautifully said.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back to finish up our deep dive into the world of TikTok and its impact on the music industry. We've been talking about all this data on how TikTok's affecting the music industry, and it's pretty amazing, right? It really feels like we're seeing this huge change in how music is made, shared, and experienced, especially for newer artists who are trying to get their music out there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be into music. You know, we've gone from this world where it felt like the radio stations and record labels had all the control to now where basically anyone with a phone and a catchy song could potentially reach people all over the world.
And the cool thing is, it's not just about going viral or becoming famous overnight. This report shows how TikTok's actually making a difference for the music industry, like real money coming in,
Right.
more streaming revenue, more people at concerts, and even more merch sales.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in this report was the data on how TikTok users are more likely to pay for music streaming services. It shows they're really into the music and willing to spend money to support it. It's not just about listening for free. They actually want to support the artist and the whole industry.
Right. It's like they're voting with their wallets.
And speaking of breaking down barriers, we can't forget about how TikTok's helping to connect people with music from all over the world. It's like this global soundtrack for our lives.
I like that. It's like TikTok's curating this global playlist for all of us, exposing us to sounds and artists from all these different cultures.
But it makes you think, too,
Right.
right? Like, what happens next? How does the music industry keep changing? Will we see even more collaborations between artists and these tech platforms?
Those are big questions.
Hmm.
It's hard to know for sure. But what we do know is that TikTok is a major player, and it's only going to get bigger in the coming years. I mean,
Wow.
think about it. If it's having this much impact now, imagine what it'll be like as it keeps growing and reaching more people. Totally. So anyone out there who's into music, whether you're an artist, a fan, or work in the industry, you need to be paying attention to TikTok. It's not just a fad. It's a game changer.
It really is. Reports like this are so helpful because they give us this data-driven look at what's happening in music right now. And that helps us make smarter choices for the future. This isn't just guessing. It's using data to understand where things are headed.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into TikTok and music, what's the one big thing you want people to take away from our conversation?
This is more than just an app. This is a cultural phenomenon that's changing how we find, listen to, and experience music. And that impact is only going to grow in the years to come.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep those playlists diverse. Keep exploring new artists and keep sharing the music you love. Because in the end, it's music that brings us all together, no matter who we are or where we come from. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of music and TikTok. We'll catch you next time.